A few months back, I was in Panda Express, and I was sitting there, and I was waiting for our food to come, and there was a poster on the wall that caught my eye, and it was an old Chinese proverb, and it said, "Make those who are near happy, and those who are far will come. Make those who are near happy, and those who are far will come." And in planning a new church, it's really easy to focus on getting new people who are far away to come to your church. We need more people. We want to grow. That's not a bad thing. We want to extend God's kingdom. We want to share his love with the people of this city. Of course we do. That's not a bad thing. But it's very easy for that to become the overriding focus. We need to get more people to come. We need to get more people to come. But I felt like in that moment and through some other things, that God instead was calling us to focus on discipleship in 2023, to focus on the people who are near, not at the exclusion of the people who are far, but that he was inviting us to focus on building up one another, on building up the church, on discipleship, in making disciples of Jesus, and that he was going to take care of a lot of the rest of that. And really, discipleship is at the heart of the very existence of the church. You know, Jesus' final words to his disciples before he ascended into heaven were instruction, right? To go into all the world and to make disciples. So there's nothing new about one sense in what God is asking us and inviting us into this year in 2023. But at the end of the day, how many churches out there actually do a good job of intentionally making disciples? Actually, a better question would be, how many of us, how many believers do a good job of intentionally making disciples out of ourselves? And as we continue in the early stages in the life of our church, I feel like God's inviting us to figure out with him, how are we going to become disciples, intentional disciples? And how are we going to do a good job of, in turn, discipling others? And, you know, that word disciple is a weird one, isn't it? It's not a word that we use about. You don't go to work and talk about discipleship. We don't use that word to refer to someone learning at school, for example, a student. We don't call a student a disciple, do we? If you're a manager at work, you don't refer to the people who work for you as your disciples, do we? Right? It's not a word that we really have much use for in everyday language. So sometimes it's kind of can get a little bit cloudy about what it is that we're really talking about. The English word disciple simply means a learner. That's all it means. Someone who learns. But in the Gospels, the word that's translated disciple in most English translations actually means a lot more than that. It referred to someone who didn't just learn from their teacher, but to someone who actively adopted the lifestyle of their teacher. It's not just about learning stuff. It's about emulating. It's about modeling. A better word to understand discipleship in our day and age might actually be apprenticeship. We're called to be apprentices to Jesus. Jesus didn't come so that we could quote his teaching word for word when he was done. Sorry to shatter any illusions about that. That's not why he came, is it? He didn't come so that we could just simply learn. He came so that we could have life to the full, right? He came so that we could live an awesome, expansive, joy-filled, God-centered life patterned after his own life. That's why he came. I've been listening to an audio book. It's the biography of Bono, the lead singer of U2. Man, this audio book is huge. It's like 20 hours long. It's super long, but it's fascinating, and it's basically each chapter is the title of a U2 song that Bono wrote, and it's telling his life story through 40 different songs that have been written over the course of the last, 40 years, pretty much. And it's fascinating just to get a glimpse into the life of someone who, for me personally, I've looked up to and admired in all sorts of different ways for quite a long time. But it got me thinking, why do we read biographies? I mean, maybe you don't like to read biographies, but those of you who do like to read biographies, why do we do that? We read biographies because we look up to the person that we're reading about, right? We think their life is in some way worth emulating. We want to model some aspect of our life on theirs. And so we want to find out more about them and about what makes them tick and the way that they actually live their life. We want to replicate their successes and we want to avoid their failures, right? We read about how they lived their life and we apply it to our own lives. And in the four Gospels, right here, we have the biography of Jesus. We have the biography of the most compelling man who ever lived. But most of the time, we don't read it like a biography. We give our attention to Jesus' teaching and his miracles, for the most part, and we don't pay that much attention to how he actually lived his life on a day-to-day basis. Which actually, if we're going to be his apprentices, that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we're supposed to be emulating, right? Is the life that he lived. We're not just supposed to teach other people what he taught us. We're not just supposed to perform the miracles in praying for the sick and casting out demons or whatever else it might be that Jesus did. We're supposed to be emulating his life so that our lives look like his. But that's not really how we read the Bible most of the time. We don't read it like a biography. I don't know if you realize this, but Jesus never taught us, instructed us, commanded us to have a quiet time. He never commanded us to read our Bibles. He never commanded us to live in community. He never commanded us to give generously. He never commanded us to take a day off, to practice Sabbath. What he did was he simply did those things and said, "Follow me." Doing what Jesus said is really important, yeah, but doing what Jesus did is even more important. That's really what discipleship, apprenticeship is about. It's doing what Jesus did. It's following after him, looking at the model of his life and doing those same kind of things. At Everyday SLO, since we began, we've had a vision that we put in place over this last year. And our vision, hopefully you've heard it multiple times if you've been around for a little while. And we've said that our vision is to be a people who are encountering God through his presence, a people who are being transformed by his power, and a people who are serving this city with his passion. That's a good vision right there, I think, personally. I think that's a good bunch of stuff for us to be doing. That's what God has been inviting us to build. And that vision's not changing, but I do feel like God's bringing more clarity, more definition, and more even simplicity to that vision, particularly as he emphasizes discipleship to us this year. So what I want to do now is I want to share with you our vision for 2023 and even maybe beyond. We'll see. If you want to put that slide up, Sophie, that would be great. Our vision is a family of Jesus followers who are living life to the full every day. Being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing what Jesus did. A family of Jesus followers who are living life to the full every day, being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing what Jesus did. So encountering God is still in there. Being transformed by him, it's still there. Serving this city is still in that vision. All those ideas and aspects of our vision are still there. I just feel like God is bringing them together in a new way that particularly focuses on this idea of apprenticeship to Jesus. And this vision is both for the church gathered and the church scattered. We want to be with Jesus. We want to become like Jesus. We want to do what Jesus did as we gather together on a Sunday morning, in small groups, in social gatherings, in outreach, in missions, whatever it is that we're doing. Whenever we're gathered together, we're going to do this vision. We're going to practice this vision. It's going to come to pass in that way. But it's also a vision for the church scattered. Because really, actually, even more importantly, we want to support, encourage, equip, empower one another to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, to do what Jesus did when we're church scattered on Monday morning at work. Or when we're church scattered on Thursday night having family dinner night with our families. Or on Saturday afternoon when you're hanging out with your friends. It's not just about church gathered, but it's also about church scattered. So let's look at each one of these briefly together and explore what each of them means a little bit more. So firstly, being with Jesus. Everything starts with relationship. I mean, that's why God created us, to have relationship with us. It wasn't just so that we could serve him, but so that we could know him, so that we could have a deep connection, so that we could be part of his family. Jesus says in John 15, verse 4, "Abide in me as I also abide in you." Depending on that translation, that word abide might say live in me, or it might say remain in me. It's a word of deep, 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 deep connection. Jesus is the source of everything. So he tells the disciples, says, "I am the vine, and you're the branches. Apart from me, you can't do nothing." Jesus is the source of everything. We have to remain in him. We have to abide in him. We have to stay connected with him. So being with him is super, super, super important. And Jesus showed us how to do it. He regularly went off by himself to be with his Father, to take time to stay connected to his Father. He did it particularly before big moments. If you look back at the start of his ministry, when it says after Jesus was baptized, the Spirit led him into the wilderness. That word could also be just translated solitary or alone place. He went off on his own to pray and to fast. And it says, after 40 days he was hungry and the devil came to tempt him. And we're like, that's just like that devil, right? He picks on us when we're down. But if that's what he was thinking, I think he made a miscalculation. Jesus had just spent 40 days in the wilderness with his Father. He was at his peak. The Spirit led him. Jesus didn't decide to do it. The Spirit led him. He knew what was coming, knew what the devil had planned. And so Jesus went off to get 40 days alone with his Father, so he was ready and he was prepared for this moment, this huge moment in his life. The night before Jesus is crucified, what does he do? He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, he goes off on his own, and he prays. He makes sure that his connection with his Father is right, that his connection with his Father is good, before another the hugest moment of his entire life. But he also did it when he was tired and when he'd had a busy day. He made sure that he stayed connected with his Father. In Mark 1, Jesus goes to Capernaum, and this is really kind of his first day of ministry. And he starts off it's the Sabbath, and he starts off and he goes to the synagogue and he's teaching and he's healing people in the morning. And then over lunch he goes to Peter's mother's house and he heals Peter's mother. And then into the evening it says that he healed all the sick and demon possessed. Not just some, it says they brought him everyone that was sick and demon possessed. and he healed them into the night, into the evening. So if that was me after a busy day of ministry, you know what I want to do on Sunday morning? This was Sabbath on the Saturday, Sunday morning. I think I'd want to lie in bed a little bit. I think I'd maybe want to get a leisurely brunch, maybe with the disciples, mid-morning, definitely closer to 11:30 than 10:30. But what does Jesus do? Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. First day of ministry, morning till night, he's go, 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 go. And what does he do? He gets up early in the morning to make sure that connection with his Father's still there. We see the same thing in Matthew 14, the feeding of the 5,000. All these people come out to him and he's teaching and teaching. He's teaching so long that it's late in the day. It's too late for anyone to go and get dinner. So, he performs his miracle and feeds the 5,000. What does he do right after that? He sends the disciples off and he goes off by himself into the night to pray. He had no time during the day to connect with the Father, so he did it at night instead. Even though he was tired, connection with his Father was his priority. So the takeaway really is wherever you're at in life, whatever's going on, being with Jesus has to be our priority. I mean, that's why we spend an extended time of worship on Sundays. Like, we value God's presence. Maybe for some of you guys, it's like, I wish they wouldn't do so many songs. They wouldn't spend so long in worship. That's okay. But we're going to keep doing it because we have a huge value for the presence of God, of this connection with the Father, of being with Jesus. And my prayer is that you're going to learn to love it and prioritize it as well. As we seek and we find God and we enjoy his presence, something wonderful happens. Something actually incredible happens. What happens is that we become what we behold. As we look upon Jesus, as we spend time with Jesus, we become more like Jesus, which is the second aspect of this vision. We want to become like Jesus. Romans 8:29 tells us that our destiny is to be conformed to the image of Christ. Okay? Our destiny is to be conformed to the image of Christ. In the Message translation, it says, God decided from the outset to shape the lives of those who love him along the same lines as the life of his Son. It's that apprenticeship happening again there. Not just conform our lives to his teaching, but conform our lives to the life of his Son. God's plan is that you would look just like Jesus. And he does that in two ways. The first way is through transformation. If you know the tiniest little part about biology, you'll know that butterflies come from caterpillars, right? I mean, you only have to read The Hungry Caterpillar as a little kid to know that level of scientific exploration. Caterpillars who are kind of walk all around, hairy, ugly little things, go into a cocoon. There's a transformation that takes place, and they come out, emerge as something completely different, as a beautiful butterfly that can fly around, right? It's in nature, it's probably the most incredible picture of transformation. Transformation is where you take something and you turn it into something else, right? That's what transformation means. God transforms our lives through his power, and he does it most significantly when we get saved, when we become new creations. The old is gone, the new has come. We talked about this a whole bunch last Sunday on Easter Sunday. That's transformation. We become brand new people. Our old selves are put to death, and we become brand new people. But the second way that we become like Jesus is through formation. Not transformation, but formation. Because transformation, as I said, is turning one thing into something else. Whereas formation is making something look more like it's supposed to be. if you went to the store and you bought a big lump of clay and you shaped it into a sculpture, the more you shape it, the more the image of the sculpture becomes visible, right? That's formation. You didn't transform the clay into something else, but rather you formed it until it became what you always intended it to be. And so God transforms us into new creations, but then you get to partner with him so that you are formed more and more and more into the true representation of what he intended that new creation to be. Does that make sense? Transformation continues to happen through the power of God in our life, but actually God becomes more and more and more interested in this process of formation to shape us and mold us, rather than in transforming us in the blink of an eye. And he does that through the circumstances that we face. He does that through the good stuff that happens in our life, but actually most often he does it through the challenging stuff that happens in our life. That's a one way and a very powerful way that he loves to form us and to mold us. But you know what? The person who is most responsible for your formation is you. It's not God, and it's not your church. It's you. You have the responsibility for your own formation. You get to choose the rate at which you become more like Jesus through the choices that you make. And part of the job of the church is for us all together to help and to support and encourage one another in that process of formation. And we want to get really, really, really good at that, especially over this coming year. We really, really do. But at the end of the day, it's up to us. It's our choices that determine our formation, how quickly we become more and more like Jesus. And our spiritual formation really happens in a large part as we devote ourselves to the spiritual practices or disciplines that we see modeled in the life of Jesus. And so really, actually, we become more like Jesus as we engage together in the final part of our vision. And that's doing what Jesus did. Being an apprentice to Jesus means doing what Jesus would do if he were you. The Jesus depicted in the Gospels was a Jewish man. He was an itinerant preacher who had a background in construction, living in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. And he was also the Son of God. Jesus was not a homeschooling mum with 3 kids. Jesus was not an engineer. He was not a realtor. He was not an administrator. He was not a plumber. He was not a teacher. He wasn't any of the things that most of us in this room spend a lot of our time doing. He was not you. So if you had one of those bands back in the day, WWJD bands, that's awesome, but asking the question, what would Jesus do, only gets us so far, because Jesus wasn't you. He didn't drive a car around. He didn't have an iPhone in his pocket. He didn't do the job that you do. He didn't have a family. He wasn't married. He didn't have kids. He didn't live in America in the 21st century. So asking ourselves, what would Jesus do if he were me, is a much more helpful question. What would Jesus do if he were you? Well, apart from taking the time to connect with the Father as his first priority that we already talked about, and apart from engaging in those kind of spiritual disciplines that we already mentioned, solitude, Sabbath, scripture, community, giving, so on and so forth, like what did Jesus do on earth? Well, he loved people, didn't he? Right? He showed people unconditional love, no matter who they were, where they were from, what their race was, whether they're male or female, whether they were young, whether they were old. He loved people. Secondly, he served people. He met their needs. He met their physical needs by serving them a miraculous dinner. He met their emotional needs. He met their relational needs. He met their spiritual needs, of course. He even washed their stinky feet. Jesus served people. Thirdly, he brought the kingdom of heaven to earth. He healed the sick and he cast out demons. He taught people what the kingdom was like. He said, hey, the kingdom is here and now. He came and said, hey, I'm here now. The kingdom of God is here, and this is what it looks like when God's in charge. He brought the kingdom of heaven to earth. And then fourthly, he made disciples. He spent the last 3 years of his life investing in 12 guys. He taught them. He lived life with them. He did relationship with them. He reproduced his life in 12 guys who then reproduced their lives in even more people. So doing what Jesus did means that we figure out how Jesus would love people, how Jesus would serve people, how Jesus would bring the kingdom, and how Jesus would make disciples if he were you. That's what it means to do what Jesus did if he were you. We figure out how to love people, we figure out how to serve people, we figure out how to bring the kingdom, and we figure out how to make disciples in each of our own contexts. Taking into account who we are and our personality and our age and our jobs and where we live and our family situation and all that kind of stuff. You know, I love to travel. I love everything really almost about the process of traveling. The whole, not just, you know, where we're going, but the plane journey and what movies I might get to watch on the plane. I figure that out like in advance. What am I going to watch while I'm on the plane? Whereas Zoe would much rather just get to the destination. She's like, I do not want to go through this whole getting in the car, driving to LA, getting on the plane, blah, 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 packing, all that stuff. She doesn't like any of that. She'd rather just get there and to be there. She hates the journey. But there's a growing phenomenon that psychologists are calling destination addiction. And you can experience destination addiction sitting in your chair right now. You don't have to go anywhere to experience destination addiction. It's not a physical place, but it's a state of mind. Destination addiction describes the belief that success and happiness is the destination. You know, everything will be better once we're in our new house. I'll be successful when I can buy myself a new car. I'll be happy when I can fit into a smaller pair of jeans. Right? That's destination addiction right there. And it can be just as prevalent in a church, particularly a new church plant. You know, we think we've made it as a church when we have 50 people or 100 people or insert your own number here, number of people, whatever that might be for you. We'll have made it as a church when we have a whole band to lead us in worship. It's not just Rich on his guitar. We'll have made it when we have 15 or 20 or whatever it is, small groups, whatever our metric is for that. We will have made it when our giving hits X number of $1,000s a month. We will have made it when we have our own building. You know? Those are some of the thoughts and the ideas that we can have. Those are the destinations that we have in mind. We'll have made it when we reach those points, when we reach that destination. And those things are all awesome. But you know, building a church, just as walking with Jesus in general, is much more like a road trip than a business trip. You know, in a business trip, the destination is the all-important thing. Not really even the destination, but that conference table that you need to sit around in that office building is the most important thing. You need to get there as quickly as possible so that you can get to your meeting, do your meeting, and get out there. The destination is the key. But in a road trip, the journey is just as important as the destination, right? You load up the car with snacks and games and music. You stop off to see the sights along the way. You take in the scenic route to make the most of experiencing everything that you possibly can. And when the Israelites left Egypt, when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt after their captivity to the promised land, it should have taken them no more than 10 days to get to the promised land from Egypt. 10 days, that's all it should have been taken. But instead, it took them 40 years. 40 years, 10 days. That's a little bit of a difference right there, isn't it? God led them on the scenic route, and then some. And typically, we see this as God's punishment for their disobedience. It's like, these guys right here who disobeyed me, they're not going to get to see the promised land. Apart from Joshua and Caleb, the rest are going to die out on the way because they complained, because they were disobedient. That's the perspective and the mindset that we have on it. But what did God do for the nation of Israel in those 40 years? Well, firstly, he made them a nation. They were not a nation when they left Egypt, but by the time they got to the promised land, they were. He gave them a rule of law. He gave them his laws. He gave them a system of government. He gave them a new system of worship. He taught them in words and deeds who he was. He revealed himself to them. He showed them that he was I am. They'd never known his name before. He revealed it to them through Moses. And he showed them who he was and how to live a life that pleased him. He demonstrated his guidance, his protection along the way in all sorts of different ways. You see, the journey was the place that he got them ready for the destination. He completely changed and transformed who they were. He established everything that they needed to be who he wanted them to be in the 40 years of that journey. By the time they'd walked that journey of 40 years, they were ready for their destination. And you might be experiencing church destination addiction right now. You may be thinking, I'll be honest, I do often. I'm like, oh God, could we have some more people? If only we had some more people. If only we didn't have to set up and tear down every Sunday. You know, those kind of thoughts. But let me tell you that we have a privilege. You have a privilege that no one else is going to get to experience. God is shaping us and molding us into the church that he wants us to be right now in this season. We get to be a part of that. We get to have a hand in building the foundations of this church and establishing what this church is going to be in the years to come. You know, and in 5, 10, 50 years from now, people are going to get to come and benefit from and experience what God has done with us on this journey. But they won't have the privilege that we have of shaping these foundations, of investing in the future with our time and with our energy and with our resources. And so I'm excited for the destination. I am. I'm excited for the day that this place is completely packed out. I'm excited for the day when we have all sorts of musicians and creatives all over the place. I'm excited for the day when we have small groups meeting right across this city. I'm excited for the day when we do have our own facility, when we have our own building, and that we can even invite other church plants, new church plants, to come and use our space just like Mountain Brook are doing for us. I'm excited for those days, but I'm excited for the journey right now in 2023. I'm excited for what God's going to do, what he's going to show us, what he's going to teach us. The church that is going to mold us and shape us into. The people that is going to mold us and is going to shape us into as we walk out this journey together.